Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate the introduction. It is great to be back here in Iowa. Just to give everybody a count, I'm at 16 counties so far this year. So we're getting around the state of Iowa and getting a chance to talk to folks. The other night, Karen and I were at home and watching a movie that I would encourage all of you to watch. It's a movie called Caucus. Anybody here seen the movie Caucus? It's about the 2012 Iowa caucuses. And I watched it because every time I go to Iowa, I try to watch that movie because I see all the people I met on the campaign trail in Iowa and I remember their names better. So it sort of helps me. But it reminded me of a story from when I was campaigning in Iowa. I was in Storm Lake. And I was working, as you can imagine, had a little town hall meeting, working the restaurant afterwards, going around table to table as you do, and I came across an elderly couple and even an older woman sitting across from them, obviously their mother. And I walked up and I introduced myself and I turned to the older woman and she said, "Stop calling me!" Every politician in Iowa has heard this. And I said, I'm sorry. She goes, "Stop calling me. You guys are calling me day and night and day and night. Stop calling me. And when you call me, you're always calling for my husband. And he's been dead for 2 years." And I said, "Oh, I'm very sorry about that, ma'am." And she changed her whole demeanor. She goes, "Oh, don't worry. He was 95. And I looked at her and I said, "He must have robbed the cradle." And she looked up with me without missing a beat, and she said, "You can call me anytime." Welcome to Iowa. So it is great to be back here. And I want to take a little issue with the introduction because at the end of the caucus movie, they ended with my speech. You may remember the speech where I talked about my grandfather's hands and talked about how important it was he dug freedom for me in this country. And you would get the impression from that movie and from this introduction that I won the Iowa caucuses. But of course, on caucus night, I didn't. I didn't win the Iowa caucuses, as I say, when it mattered, to give you the boost to go on afterwards. And so I share that with you because a lot of people say, well, he won the Iowa caucus, went on and won a bunch of other states. But the weeks later, when it was announced I won the Iowa caucuses, it ran on page 24 or so in the New York Times. No one knew that I won the Iowa caucuses. But here's the interesting thing. After the carve-out states, all the states where everybody locks in and gets all their people organized, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. After those carve-out states, even though we got no recognition for winning the Iowa caucuses, we won or tied in delegates 12 of the next 24 states. And I think it's important to understand because people would say, well, Rick Santorum is just sort of the last guy standing. He worked hard in Iowa, and he was sort of the last guy standing because he won Iowa, he did well. I think you have to think again. I don't think it was because I was the last guy standing. I think it was two things, because I stood for something, and I stood for someone. I stood for the people in America who feel like they're being left behind by both political parties. I went out and crossed the state of Iowa and crossed this country and talked about the people in America who neither political party is talking to in a meaningful way. Do you realize median income in the last 7 years has declined or flatlined? We used to have median income in this country about $57,000 down to $51,000. Wages are flat. The middle of America is hollowing out. And neither political party, the Democrats, all they want to do is redistribute money, but they don't really want to talk opportunity. And Republicans, we're stuck. We're stuck with a 35-year-old message on the economy. It's a message that says cut taxes for high-income individuals, balance the budget, and cut government. Now, all those things I'm for. If you look at my record, I'm very solid on all those issues. And they're right, but it's insufficient in America today. Why? Because that's the message that Ronald Reagan gave. And it was worked for America. But it's like a politician coming out today and saying to America, Ronald Reagan coming out and saying to America, what we need to do is adopt the economic message of Wendell Willkie. Because the distance between Wendell Willkie and Ronald Reagan is the same distance between Ronald Reagan and today. And America, ladies and gentlemen, changed a lot in that interim, and the Republican Party has not adapted our message to who we are and what America needs. And what America needs is a message that says that we have hope and opportunity. It's not just growth. I wrote a book last year called Blue Collar Conservatives. And in that, I wrote a chapter that says, a rising tide lifts all boats. That's a comment that John Kennedy made. Except if your boat has a hole in it. And in America today, millions and millions of Americans have holes in their boats. And so when the tide goes up, the NASDAQ hits at the top. People don't feel wealthier. People feel like they're sinking deeper. We are the party of working Americans. We are the party of work and opportunity. But our message rings hollow to a lot of those workers. Do you realize that I spent a night on Tuesday night at the National Convention 4 years ago, and on there were placards on all the seats, and all the seats said, these placards said, "We built that." And that night we spent an hour and a half or 2 hours trotting out business person after business person saying how Barack Obama insulted them by saying that they didn't build their business. And not one time did we have a worker come to that stage. Do you realize 90% of Americans who work don't own a business, don't run a business? They work for a living for a business or an agency. And we need to have a candidate and a message that connects. I went out and talked about manufacturing. I talked about vocational education and training. I talked about energy production and keeping energy prices low. Why? Because lower income individuals spend 40% of their take-home pay on energy. We need to be the party that understands the needs and the problems that confront America today and have sufficient solutions, not just about growth, but about how we're going to create opportunities for the 74% of Americans who don't have a college degree. How are they going to rise in America today? That's the vision. People say, how did you win? We won because we connected. We connected with those voters, and if we're going to win this election, but more importantly, if America is going to be reunited again, then we need to be the party that brings them together. We need to be the party that says that we're going to cut taxes, yes, but we're going to make sure that we do so in a way that makes manufacturing globally competitive, that we can compete so Made in America isn't just a slogan, it's a reality. We need to talk about workers and immigration. It used to be the Democratic Party was the party of limited immigration, but they've sold out. Why? We all know why. Power. Because they realize that if the more immigrants they come into this country and the more they can divide and play power games with ethnic minorities in this country, that they'll get very high percentages of those votes. So they're not interested. They're interested in accumulating more power. They're not worried about the impact on workers in America today. And there's study after study out right now about the fact that the overwhelming majority of workers who come into this country, people who come into this country legally and of course illegally, are low-skilled workers that are driving wages down for working Americans. And where are the Republicans? Well, the establishment is all for open borders or more immigration. Why? Because it keeps labor costs down. That labor costs are American families. That's whose labor costs we're keeping down. We're keeping down the wages of American families, and that's not the party that I want to be a part of. We need to look at our messaging. I know this is not going to be the most popular thing, but I will tell you that I've already come out and said that we need to have an increase in the minimum wage. And you might say that's a heresy among Republicans. Maybe so. Anybody know what percentage of American workers actually make the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage? Answer, 1% 2 years ago. And we are out there dancing on the head of a pin saying how a 50-cent or $1 increase in the minimum wage, which is what I support, is going to have an impact if only 1% of workers are making the minimum wage. We can go out and talk about how we have to bail out Wall Street, that we have to bail out auto companies, but when it comes to providing worker protection for the lowest wage workers, we have to be Adam Smith. No, we need to say that we're on the side of the American worker. We need to go out and prove it with policies. You know, if this was the election in 2012, I could probably end that discussion right now about the economy and how to win this election. Oh, there's other important issues like education. I talk about the importance of vocational education in this country. I talk about a parental revolution. You know, there's been books out, one by the far left and one by the far right. A guy named Robert Putnam on the left and Charles Murray on the libertarian right. And they both come down to say, you know what's hollowing out the middle of America? It's something I talked about in the 2012 race. I remember being at Dartmouth College with Charlie Rose, and we had a Bloomberg News debate all on the economy. And at the end, he was going to go to closing statements. I said, Charlie, I got a statement I got to make. You know, yeah, the economy's hurting, and Obama's done a terrible job. But we haven't talked at all about the real problem in America that's hollowing out the center of this country. And I talked about how the word economy comes from the Greek word oikos, which means home or family. And the fact of the matter is, the biggest change since 1980 and Ronald Reagan is the breakdown of the family, and now a majority of American children are being raised without fathers in the homes. You want to talk about the ultimate small business in America? It's the nuclear family in America, and it's crumbling, and America is struggling because of it. And there are things the government can do and say, and society can do and say to help knit that family back together, to help in tax laws and welfare laws. But what these both studies show is that the consequence of that is not just the impact on children in the home, but it's also the impact of children in schools. And parental involvement in their children's lives directly equates to how well those children do in school. You ask any teacher, ask any administrator, that is absolutely the case. And so what do we focus our time and energy on? Some ridiculous idea called Common Core, which says to parents, keep out, instead of common sense, which says, parents, come on in, and let's create a revolution in education that gives them control. But this isn't 2012, this is 2016. And 2016, there's another issue that's, at least from the town meetings I'm doing in Iowa, is as important as any, and that's national security. There were 23 debates last time. I know many people thought that was too many. I went to 22 of them. And there was one debate on national security. Hardly a question on the other ones about it. And now, people understand America isn't safe. It's not as safe as we'd like it to be. We're going to be going up against a Secretary of State, someone with a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge in this area, most of it wrong, but someone who's knowledgeable, someone who's an expert. So we need to look at someone to go up against Mrs. Clinton who has background, experience, knowledge, and has gotten it right when she's gotten it wrong. You may know about the Iranian situation, and a lot of us are saying what we should have done is just held to those tough sanctions and forced them into ceasing their nuclear programs, not go into negotiations with them. That's the position I took. It's also a position I took 11 years ago when I introduced one of those sanctions bill that was crushing Iran. I introduced it in 2004, and nobody co-sponsored it with me. In 2006, I took a vote. President Bush, unfortunately, opposed me. He was against tougher sanctions on their nuclear program. But so was Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, and Barack Obama. We had a vote, and they all voted no. 6 months later, after it became clear how Iran was, in fact, developing these nuclear weapons, everyone voted for it. It passed a unanimous vote, and it was part of the reason Iran was being brought to its knees. There's a contrast there. I recognize that you cannot, and I told President Bush at the time in 2006 when he and Condoleezza Rice were trying to do negotiations. I said I oppose those negotiations. I oppose them because Iran is not a country you can negotiate with. They have never kept a treaty. I don't care how good the treaty is. I don't care how good this treaty is. It's horrible right now. But even if it was good, here's my promise to the Iranian government. On the first day of a Santorum presidency, that agreement is in the trash can. I just hope and pray that we're still even talking about it. That we haven't put Iran onto a path of a nuclear weapon, and before that day, something cataclysmic occurs. But it's not just Iran that I've been focused on, and very focused on, I might add. It's also been the greater threat of radical Islam throughout the Middle East. I was down in Marion County, and the county attorney down there, Ed Bull, reminded me I was in Pleasantville 4 years ago. We went into his room, his house, and we talked about how it was a mistake for us to pull our troops out of Iraq, and how we should have been engaged with the Syrian rebels to stop and to take out Assad. Both positions I publicly took in the 2012 race. I said, if we don't do that, when we leave, something horrible is going to rise up and cause us worse problems than we've ever seen. I don't know if you saw this just a few days ago. I was in a magazine online. Not a big deal. I'm in a lot of magazines online, but it's my first time that I was in ISIS magazine. My picture was in the ISIS online magazine under the heading, "In the words of our enemy." And what were those words? They were the truth. They were the truth about what ISIS is. They were the truth about this is a caliphate that must be taken down. Otherwise, it will expand. I laid out how we do that, the troops that we have to commit. And people say, well, you know, you're trigger happy. You want to commit troops. I have a son who just signed up to the Air Force. But even before that happened, every decision I'd ever make, and I made when I was a senator and congressman, I made that if I was the person or my son was the person that was going there, I would do it. If we do not contain ISIS, and I don't mean contain them by holding them where they are, I mean pushing them out of Iraq, taking land from them, then ISIS will continue to recruit and recruit effectively, not just in the Middle East, but here in America. We need leadership to stop them. I'm out of time, so I'm going to just conclude with this. I appreciate the opportunity to be here in Iowa again. I love Iowa, and I love America. People ask me, why are you doing this again? You just, 30 states, 2 years out of your life. The struggles that we went through that are very public about my family. And again, thank you for your prayers for my little girl, Bella, and she is doing great, by the way. And she will be 7 in 3 weeks. People ask me, why do I do it? Because I'm concerned about the future of this country. I'm concerned that we will be that generation that Ronald Reagan talked about in his great speech, A Time for Choosing, where he said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And I don't want to be in a position where in my sunset days, I have to explain to my grandchild what it was like to live in an America where people were free. Ladies and gentlemen, you have a unique role to play in freedom's play. You're Iowans. I know from personal experience, you have a disproportionate impact on the future of our country. And I would say to you, I don't have to say to you, take that seriously. I know you do. I know you do. But here's what I would say. What I'd say is, this time around, don't be a spectator and just a voter. We need you to engage. Obviously, if we decide to run, I'd love you to engage for me. But whatever the case may be, we need people who are willing to make the sacrifices necessary. One final story. On the Sunday before the Iowa caucuses, I was in a church in Sioux City. I finished speaking at that church, and afterward the pastor walked up to me, and he handed me a little box. And he said, I thought of these when I saw them on my shelf. And I thought of you and what you've done here in Iowa. And I opened them up, and there were two little trinkets. I couldn't even tell what they were. They were green and had etched markings on them. And I said, okay, what are these? And he said, you've traveled, you've done 385 town hall meetings. No one gave you a chance. You didn't have any money, but you went out because you felt called to give it all. He said, these are 2,000-year-old widow's mites. And I'm giving you these because I want you to understand that when you give all for truth, for him, he will bless you. Ladies and gentlemen, don't think for a moment that if you go back out of this room and do what you always do, that America is going to be just fine. That's a lie. You need to give the widow's mite in this election. Our country needs you. And if you do it, our Lord will bless not just you, but this great country of ours. Thank you, and God bless you.